Our first keynote gave us a lot to think about how consumers are changing and how we as marketers can meet them where they are. I'm very excited to welcome our next keynote speaker to our virtual stage. John Denny is the VP of e-commerce and digital marketing at Cavu Venture Partners. John has a ton of experience working with brands to accelerate growth and find lasting success in retail media and e-commerce. He's going to talk to us about how challenger brands are leveraging classic principles of brand advertising, but building on them to find rapid but lasting growth. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Dalton, for that introduction. So, today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that's generating a fair amount of debate and discussion in the world today. And that's the state of marketing related to brand and performance advertising. But before I do that, first, a little bit about my background. So, I lead e commerce and digital marketing for Cavu Venture Partners. And Cavu is a venture capital firm that's invested in some of the fastest growing brands over the last couple of years. Brands including Oatly, Beyond Meat, and the drink Bai, where I worked for the previous 4 years before joining Cavu. And it's sort of that experience at the fast growth startup Bai and my experience at Cavu working with over 30 of the fastest growing startup brands that's given me sort of a unique picture into the strategies that may start off and look good for some of these brands, but over time may not play out as well over the long term. And a unique feature of Cavu is that we actually have an in-house agency that partners with our brands. So with many of these brands, we're very much embedded and we get to see their strategies from early points. So there may be a strategy that's implemented in, say, 2018, then over the arc of 4 years, I can see how that strategy is played out. So it's sort of given me a unique perspective into what's going on in the world, but in the balance of performance and brand advertising. So my career and sort of the arc of my career has given me a great ringside seat at the digital ad revolution. So I started off at the ad agency Chiat/Day. And if you haven't heard of Chiat/Day, it's known in marketing circles as the agency that really created the brand that is known today as Apple. So the executive creative director, Lee Clow, worked with a team of people to partner with Steve Jobs to essentially create the brand Apple. Chiat/Day was also the agency that was responsible for building the Nike brand at early stages and the Porsche brand at early stages. So that experience at the beginning of my career was kind of amazing to see the power of building a strong brand and how an enduring brand can really change the trajectory of how a company performs. So my next experience was a dramatic shift. So I went to work with the team at Alta Vista as part of the D2B advertising agency. And Alta Vista was one of the pioneering search engines. So I got to see the world of algorithms and how the world of algorithms was going to fundamentally change the world of marketing over the next several decades. And so that was an amazing experience to see that technology emerge. Then after that, I went to work for a company called CMGI, which was one of the creators of the behaviorally targeted display ad. So Dave Weatherall was the founder of that company. He really pioneered that technology. And it was amazing, again, to see how targeting would really change the landscape of how we executed advertising. And then throughout the 2000s, I went to work for Advanced Condé Nast, huge media company, and I ran search engine optimization, paid search, and analytics teams. So my world there was focused very much on performance and day-to-day short-term results. I mean, teams would execute something and you were looking at it on an hour basis in terms of how it's performing in real-time results. So across this arc, it was something to go from that brand experience to almost a pure performance experience in ad tech. So as mentioned up front, one of the key questions that's being debated in marketing circles today is essentially, in the age of digital commerce, who needs brand advertising? So, the kind of work and the millions that were, and the years and the decades of investment that it took to build Apple and brands like Nike and brands like Porsche, is that really needed today? And you may have heard of Professor Scott Galloway, who's a professor at NYU. He recently released a book called Post-Corona. And he's talked about the move from a brand age where brands like Apple and Nike dominated and the investments that it took to build those dominated, to a world of the product age where it's algorithms and user reviews and convenience that all trump building of a brand. So this has really sparked a lot of debate. So one of the leaders of the discussion today is a guy by the name of David Tillman. Now, David works for Warwick Research, and they have done a lot of research related to this shift from brand to performance in the digital age and the implications of this. And David commented recently, what we've seen in the research we've done is that the trend towards digital commerce and the way marketing spend has changed as a result has seen a big shift of money out of brand building activity and into performance marketing. And so they did research over the last couple of years, and this actually shows they interviewed marketers in 2020 and 2021, and pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And what they saw was a stunning change in perspective post-pandemic. So essentially, the number of people who said they were investing, the number of marketers who said they were investing in brand advertising plummeted. And at the same time, the number of marketers who were investing in performance advertising accelerated rapidly. And essentially, what Warwick was saying was we're moving from a world where brands like Nike and Apple and investing in upper funnel matters to a world where advertisers are focused on very straightforward, detail-laden product ads that we see on Amazon search and Google search. So as I said, the unique thing about the job that I have is that I get to talk to brands, all over the world in many different industries, and I get to hear specifically leadership teams talk about their perspectives of advertising. And so what I've been hearing over the years from these leadership teams seems to be shifting dramatically. And I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what I've been hearing. So this is a typical CEO, and that CEO would say, what exactly does all this fluffy brand stuff do anyway? We measure every cent of what we spend. We just didn't see the ROI. The CFO. Yeah, so we tried that upper funnel stuff and it just didn't work. So we shut it down. ROAS is what we look at. So I love this story. So Dr. Grace Kite is an econometrician with magic numbers. She's based in the UK, and she's constantly using data to look at the relationship between advertising and effectiveness. And on a webinar, she related this story of a marketer she was talking to. And the marketer told this story. He said, I spoke to one of the founders about brand building. He was like, yeah, I'm not trying to do what you want me to do. I don't want to become a household name and be famous. I just want to put $1 in and get $50 back. So Grace related the story and how stunning it was. Like, there's a perception today that with the dashboards that marketers use, and I live in them every day, and I know many of you live in them every day, that if you're looking at an Amazon search dashboard, if you're looking at a Facebook dashboard, if you're looking at a Google performance dashboard, there's this feeling that advertising is a money in, money out machine. A little bit like a slot machine, but the perception is you're much more convinced you're going to get money back. So the question that I'm asking is, does this matter? What's not to love about that money machine? So to further give you a picture of my experiences over the last 4 years, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. And over several years of working with the startup brands, I've seen a similar series of events play out. So they start out with an innovative idea. They grow rapidly with an almost complete focus on the bottom of the funnel money machine. And things are awesome. Everybody's celebrating. The early years pass and sales are skyrocketing. They try some of that upper funnel branding stuff just because, why not? But 2 to 3 weeks later, it's obvious nothing's happening. So they shut it down, decisively proving that fluffy branding stuff just doesn't work. But then one day, a funny thing happens. The money machine stops working. Sales flatline. The CMO yells at the digital guy. The CEO yells at the CMO. Investors panic. And everybody runs around in the companies yelling, what the heck happened? Things were so good. We had the money machine rolling. So as the marketing world has worshipped a lot of these D2Cs and startups, I thought I might be the only person seeing a troubling pattern in all of this. But over the last year, other voices have sort of emerged talking about questions about all this. So as I mentioned, Grace Kite had a great webinar and great comment to this. And she said, When the business reaches a certain size, growth stalls. The performance machine stops working and your cost per acquisition starts to go up. And people say things in these organizations. Marketing just doesn't work anymore. It's a very frustrating moment. So Rachel Tipograph, who's the CEO of Micmac and a former director of global social for The Gap, who's talked to a lot of companies in this space, and was being questioned and in conversations talking about darlings like Warby Parker. And her comment was, the dirty secret of these D2C brands is that once you hit somewhere between $20 and $50 million in D2C revenue, you typically plateau because the cost per acquisition becomes so high. And then James Herman, who's a brand strategist based in New Zealand, who's worked with a lot of global brands like McDonald's and Unilever and Burger King, and has also worked with many, many startups. And we're going to talk more about him because he's got a really interesting perspective. But he had this comment recently. He said, the darlings in the startup world are seductive. They have a surgical ability to get people to buy their products in a way that sees them grow very quickly while spending far less on marketing. Trouble is that the majority of these companies fail in the longer term. So the question that I'm asking, is this inevitable? Is this sort of rapid growth at ARC and hitting a demand ceiling? Is this the pattern that we're going to see and there's really nothing to do about it? Just like the team that Grace Kite talked about, the marketing team who said, well, marketing doesn't really work anymore. Is that the truth? Does marketing not work? So to delve into that question, first, I'm going to dig into some basics. So as I mentioned, one of the leaders in this discussion is David Tillman at WARC and James Herman. And they co-authored a white paper for WARC that was released in July. And it really dug into this issue. And they looked at, well, what happens when brands over-rely on performance advertising? And James Herman's thesis is that performance marketing is really focused on targeting customers already in the market, like this example of basketball shoes. Like the consumer who's entering this search already knows that they want something and they're searching and researching brands. So James Herman said, the challenge is at any single point in time, there's a finite amount of demand for that brand. There's only a certain amount of people who have need of the brand's product category, who are aware of the brand, who would consider buying it if the right offer were put in front of them. And over time, brands efficiently convert all available market demand with conversion tactics. Just like a farmer who has sort of planted the field of corn, they're harvesting it over and over and over again until they get to the point where it looks like a dusty plain, like you're seeing in the picture. So then they see their performance metrics decline as that demand is exhausted. And ultimately, they optimize themselves out of effectiveness. So James creates this chart to capture this concept. So the orange dotted line represents the demand, the finite demand in the market. The blue line represents the rapid growth over time. And you can see on the left-hand side, this brand starts up and quickly grows, but then hits the demand ceiling. And at that point, conversion activity stops working as there's no more brands, there's no more demand to convert. So on the alternate side, just like a farmer who, when he's harvesting a field over and over and again of mature crops, at some point, he might like to the field next door and begin to plant new seeds and water and fertilize and develop the next generation of crops. James introduces the idea of future demand. So future demand is created when new customers become aware of a brand and they add it to the consideration point. So at that point, and only at that point, are they more likely to respond to performance marketing. And before that point, trying to get them to convert is going to be very, very difficult and it's going to cost a lot of money. So he created this illustration to capture that. So you can see, again, the orange line now is rising over time. So future demand is built. Demand is converted at a sustainable rate once it's created. And that blue line is matching the orange line over time. So again, just like that field, I think about that farmer is harvesting that crop over and over and over again, the crop of mature plants. He then says, okay, I got to start building the next crop that I'm going to harvest. And he goes and plants seeds. Well, it's a little bit of the law of the farm here that it's not just going to instantly be a field that he can start converting. So those plants have to be watered. They have to grow. They have to reach a point of maturity that then you can harvest them. So as James says, this process of becoming sufficiently aware of, familiar with, and trusting of a brand to turn it into convertible demand, it doesn't happen in the space of one campaign, one ad, one interaction with that brand. It's all involves familiarity and trust, and you need multiple interactions with a brand over weeks, months, years to make that happen. So it's this combination of both of these. It's the creation of future demand, planting new fields and new crops, combined with harvesting existing demand, that is the key to sustained growth. So these two strategies are compatible. They should happen concurrently, but they require completely different marketing approaches, which are going to be some new learning for a lot of brands who are focused on the bottom of the funnel. So Grace Kite, I thought, had an excellent explanation also of this concept when she was talking to marketers who were hitting that demand ceiling. And she said, you need to reach outside the immediately available pool of people shopping right at this moment. So to do that, you need wider reach. Then you can traditionally get in channels, bottom of the funnel channels that might be like Amazon search, Google search, Facebook performance. She said you also need richer creative combined with attention grabbing and attention holding media. And that's got to be something a little bit more than a text ad. So what are examples of attention grabbing and attention holding media that I see working? So a little tip here is that this is created, future demand is effectively created often through sight, sound, and motion. That's one of the most effective places that we see it created. And there's plenty of data out there showing that particularly the largest screen in the home for streaming or linear, the impact and power that creates. So I definitely, if you're looking at creating future demand, look at that. Also, there's been a revolution that's happened. So at Buy, in 2018, I was in charge of a advertising budget that was between, somewhere around $30 million. I was buying 20 million in broadcast TV, cable television, streaming television through one of the largest agencies in the world. Since that point, I mean, the conventional wisdom at that point was that you needed to spend millions of dollars to get into this sight, sound, and motion game in the largest screen in the home. Today, a revolution has happened 4 years later. So the same technology that's been applied to programmatic display and video is now being applied to the world of linear TV and streaming TV. So you can now buy on a very targeted basis. You can do amazing optimization that completely changes the game in executing. And also, a lot of these platforms only require, typically a couple $100,000 to begin their testing and to begin to spend. So a lot of the brands that we're working with, we're saying, get in that pool early, begin to test sight, sound, and motion in this larger screen. And if they feel hesitant about doing that or feel like they can't afford it, we're trying to get them to DSP video and getting that brand effect happening early. So it's interesting, when I'm talking to people about using sights and sound and motion in the largest screen of the home, typically I was having a conversation with a marketer about a month ago about this. And the belief is that you want to have laser targeting to people, only the people who are in the market right now, just like you do with performance advertising. Like, why waste all that money on targeting a broader group? And Peter Field, who is one of the leading experts on advertising effectiveness globally, who basically pioneered and created the IPA data bank on advertising effectiveness, looking at hundreds of case studies, recently commented on this, and he said, do not be seduced by the idea that it's wasteful to talk to people who are not about to buy. It's vital to do so. Again, you absolutely have to go for broader reach. You have to talk to more people than just the ones in the market right now. To build future demand, you have to be talking to people before they shop. So another key question I get is, what's the right balance of investment in creating future demand versus harvesting existing demand? I'm talking about brands who are spending probably the vast majority of their budget on demand capture, bottom of the funnel. And the answer would be kind of surprising. So while they're spending money at the bottom of the funnel, expert like Peter Field, who we just saw in Les Binet, recommend a very different allocation. And I love this quote from Peter Field. He said, smart businesses don't choose between these two routes. They do both. And they do both in balance. They spend an average of 60% of their budget on brand building and about 40% on sales activation. Now, that's typically quite a shock to startup brands who are spending, obviously, a much higher ratio on demand capture at the bottom of the funnel. Peter Field, in fact, updated this research recently, and he looked at just direct-to-consumer brands who are selling primarily online. And those brands were thinking, okay, well, this may be a 60-40 allocation works for brands sold predominantly at retail. Well, what exists in the world of D2C and online sales? He went back and he looked at the IPA data bank of over 500 cases of brands and their effectiveness over the long haul. And what Peter Field it recommended was up to 74% of money spent on demand, future demand. and then lowering that amount. So over 3 times the amount spent on performance advertising in the creation of future demand. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a playbook that we're implementing that brands who are finding sustained growth over time are implementing. And basically that has 4 components or 4 principles, and I'm going to take you through each of those. So principle number 1, start building future demand at the earliest stages of the business. Now, what I'll tell you is that this is counterintuitive to every startup you're going to talk to. A founding CEO is going to want to look at what he believes to be certainty. He wants to look at return on ad spend. He wants to look at metrics, even though ad attribution today is highly misleading and oftentimes and highly flawed. He's going to take that as certainty, and he's going to want to have that certainty for every dollar he invests. But the challenge is building future demand, as we've heard, takes time. So Les Binet and Peter Thiel wrote a classic on this idea of short-term demand capture, long-term building of future demand. And in that book, they said, the process of creating the mental structures, the associations, memories, beliefs that will predispose potential customers to choose one brand over another, that takes time. So what Apple and Nike and other brands have done, takes those weeks, months, years to build. As he said, it's a long-term job involving conditioning consumers through repeated exposure. So it takes time. Talking to people long before they're in the market to buy. So another reason why, so lots of data is there to tell us that over the long term, building future demand is far more effective than focusing on bottom of the funnel. So this is actually data from Analytic Partners, who is a commercial mix modeling firm that does multi-touch attribution. And they have something called the ROI genome that has the data from over 700 brands covering 2 decades, billions of dollars of spend, and it correlates all the decisions they've made, the strategies, the channels they've invested in with ultimate success. And the bottom line conclusion, this was a quote from Mike Menkes, who did a recent webinar talking about this, and he said, according to their data, brand messaging outperforms performance messaging 80% of the time. And again, that's looking over the long term, as opposed to looking at a week or a day or an hour, as some of my brands do. The other point key is the point that James Herman made, that, again, creating future demand, it takes longer than converting existing demand. So if a brand starts creating future demand, only when existing demand is exhausted, the platform is already burning. And believe me, I've seen this as well. A brand is focusing everything on demand capture, harvesting that field over and over again, and then things get dicey and there's no plants left to harvest. And then they say, okay, well, let me start some of that future demand. And at that point, it's going to become very difficult to develop the volume of future demand that they need to match with conversion activity. So the second key point, creative matters in building future demand. And so you need to develop a distinctive position and voice. So 3 keys that James talked about in this white paper. Future demand is created when we do 3 things. Target large and new audiences, we stand out, and we bond emotionally. So when brands spend the majority of dollars in demand capture, this is how they look. They're showing up on a Google, on an Amazon product page search result, might be with 18, 20 other brands. And I know many of you out there have done the same thing that I have. We focus a lot on these detail pages. We're focused on keywords in the headline that are optimized for search on the platform. And those are pulled into all of these performance-like ads. So the result is you get something that we're seeing here. It's like protein powder, 100% whey, isolate, 25 grams of protein, 5.5 BCAAs, don't even know what that is. So you get highly technical. Now, these may work when you're in demand capture, when you already have the consumer's attention. You don't have to break through the clutter to speak to someone before they're in the market and actually get their attention. So this is typically not enough to get the attention of somebody before they're in the market. So there's also a pervasive belief out there right now that I've seen, across leadership teams and marketing teams, is that media and platform's ability to target, which is amazing, but that's all that matters today. But in reality, a lot of studies have shown, now this is data that was reported by Google through their Think with Google thought leadership series based on dynamic logic research. And And they said that studies show that on average, media placements only account for about 30% of a brand campaign success, while creative drives 70% of the success. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an example that I think is a standout, and we've seen be a standout over time since the founding of this brand early on, I want to say in 2012, to the arc of where they are today. So this is a brand that is Vital Proteins, sells collagen peptides, supplements. So it's very much like the category that we just looked at, protein powder. The categories tend to be very, very dry, and advertisers spend the vast majority of their money on demand capture. But so Vital Proteins invested significant money in demand capture as well. But from the earliest stages, they also they invested in building future demand. So planting those fields so that they would slowly build and grow the demand ceiling for their product. So, and what they did in terms of investing is going to be very different. So think about that protein powder thumbnail that we just looked at. So this is the creative approach that they took. So it was very much from the approach of appealing to women, creating a product that is going to be the Gucci of the supplement category. So they had a very successful influencer strategy. They've always been incredible experts at building their demand that way. And they then took those influencers and working with our team, incorporated them into an entire campaign that they executed in mid and upper funnel strategies to build future demand. They also invested a lot in sight and sound emotion to build that emotional connection, to build that feeling that's going to ultimately create a moat around their business. So when competitors inevitably came into the category, there was an emotional bond that this brand has and a moat created that prevents them from being copied by a whole lot of people just doing demand capture. So ultimately, I would ask you to look at these two approaches. One is very straightforward, works for demand harvesting, demand capture. But when you're moving to future demand and creation of future demand, you have to create emotion. You have to stand out. And that's what Vital Proteins did. So the third point I'm going to take you through is that you need to leverage retail media platforms like Amazon as a powerful way to build future demand and capture existing demand. So it's interesting. Forrester released a report when they looked at the explosion that is Amazon in the advertising sector. And they said, well, this is amazing. They're building all of the, a full funnel in terms of advertising. They're investing heavily in, television in the largest screen of the home, in streaming, in programmatic display, and programmatic video. But in the midst of all this, advertisers typically use Amazon ads to convert customers immediately and have them transact on Amazon, not for brand awareness. And they said of all the 50 some odd marketers that they interviewed to write the piece, they said, we've yet to run into a brand that treats Amazon as anything more than a direct response medium or direct response channel. So the other key point is that obviously these retail media platforms have been evolving rapidly. And as James Tillman said, you can increasingly build brand in what's been thought of as performance channels, despite the conventional wisdom about all of these channels. And the key is that platforms like Amazon and Instacart is also emerging in this area as well. And it's going to be a platform to watch, is they have the ability to connect brand and activation and really join the dots because they own the purchase data. So it's really going to be amazing to watch this closed loop ecosystem as it evolves. The other important thing to know, despite this perception that selling on Amazon is all about, or advertising on Amazon is all about selling on Amazon, Analytic Partners released a report where they looked in depth at the effects and impact of this advertising. So their conclusion was, on average, we see that more than half of the impact of Amazon advertising is actually on non-Amazon channels. In other words, advertising on Amazon helps drive Amazon and brick and mortar sales. And this is exactly what we found at Buy. We found it when we did our marketing mix modeling that over 50% of the impact of the advertising on Amazon, both DSP and search, was on non-Amazon channels, is on physical retail channels, which is really counterintuitive for a lot of folks out there. So the final and one of the most important points that I believe is put the scoreboards in place to measure both future demand and demand capture. So again, when I'm talking to brands out there today, typically when they have scoreboards and organizations that they're relying on, it's all about return on ad spend. It's all about CAC, customer acquisition costs. It's all about the short term. You have teams that are literally looking at these platforms hour by hour, day by day, to look at the dollar they spent and the return they got. And if they didn't get the return they think they should get, then they're shutting it down. So this reinforces the short-termism across the organization. Everybody's focused on the short term, and they're not looking at the long term. So as an alternative, I'm going to talk to you about 4 scoreboard measures that you can use in an organization to reorient leadership teams towards the longer term horizon, towards future demand creation. So 2 of these are going to be very affordable because they're free. So the first is Amazon branded search performance. So when you think about it, Amazon is the global #1 product search engine. So Amazon has become a database of intentions when it comes to what is top of mind in any product category. And using Amazon branded search performance over time can be a real strong indicator of how you are building future demand. And this is actually a chart from one of the brands that our team works with. And prior to 2020, they were pretty much all in the demand capture, demand harvest school of thought. And early in 2020, just the beginning of January, they started investing in more future demand creation, mid and upper funnel strategies on Amazon. And it really, as you can see from this chart, it really didn't impact their branded search until I want to say the beginning of May. So it was almost 5 months later. But then you had this, what we call a hockey stick effect, that it then rapidly accelerated. But I've seen so many brands who, after a month or 2 months, look at either investing in streaming or video programmatic or mid and upper funnel programmatic display. And after the 8th week, they just say, well, it didn't work. We're shutting it down. So it's scoreboards like this that can begin to change that dynamic. The other wonderful tool out there that's, again, free is Google Trends. So again, Google was the original database of intentions. This is actually a chart that I used at Buy, and each of those gray bars represents a year. And at the same time, when I was running brand tracking, brand health measurement, I could see what was happening on Google Trends. And I saw a very strong correlation as we became top of mind for consumers when I would execute a strategy and then see its correlation in Google Trends. So it's always it can be a little bit tricky to try to get it, to function, and it can have its nuances, but particularly getting a sense of where you stand versus the competitors in your category, definitely recommend Google Trends if you haven't been using it. Third measure that I would recommend is, again, you have to invest a little bit more in this, but is brand tracking or brand health measurement. So this is literally when you're going out and using panels of consumers who are in the category that you are competing in, and you're doing interviews to essentially get an assessment of their relationship to your brand versus the competitors in the category. This is just an example of one of the basic measures that we used at Buy, which is like, people who are aware, people who are ever tried, people who are trying multiple times, so repeat purchase. And we were scanning and using that consumption funnel as a monitor. So each time we were implementing a strategy or tactic, we were looking at how it impacted this. We were also looking at a whole lot of deeper measures on brand health tracking. So a lot of the connections that Peter Field talked about, building that emotional bond, that emotional connection. You can see those indicators happen in brand health measurement long before you see the impact that's going to ultimately happen on your sales measures. And finally, stepping up in the investment level is marketing mix modeling or commercial mix modeling, like companies like Analytic Partners do. So that's going to cost you a little bit more, but you see some amazing data in terms of correlations when you invest and what you get in return. This is actually a snapshot from one at Buy we used in 2018. And when we invested, the blue line represents the growth in week of impact of television. So we could see very clearly the correlation of once we invested in sight, sound, and motion in the largest screen in the home, the impact of that on our business. Okay, so now we're wrapping up. I'm going to move to the summary. So the lessons out of this, 4 key lessons. So to win in a sustained way, lesson number 1, start building future demand at the earliest stage of the businesses. Don't wait. Don't wait until James Herman says the platform is burning before you start investing to create future demand. It takes time, and you need to create that emotional connection. And that doesn't happen in the space of one ad. It's going to happen over a period of months, and in some cases, years. Number 2, develop a distinctive position and voice. You can't bore people into buying you. Creative matters in building future demand. That relation is going to happen when you stand out, because you can't use product forward, product focus when you're talking to people who are not yet in the market. Third point is leverage retail media platforms. So there's a revolution happening, as we all know, with retail media platforms as powerful full funnel delivery of impact. And it's truly a way to drive future demand and convert existing demand by connecting those dots and using those first party purchase signals. And the final point is put the scoreboards in place to measure both future demand and demand capture. As Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. If there's not the reinforcement for these leadership teams about, oh yeah, like I don't want to just focus on ROAS every single day. There's something else that I'm doing here. If you're not reinforcing that to your leadership team, it's just too easy to cut and run and to move to back to the bottom of the funnel and ultimately lead to your platform burning. And with that, just want to say thank you for coming. And now I'm going to head over to the coffee break room. I hope some of you will join me over there for a little bit of Q&A and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Great talk, John. Thank you so much. I'm sure the challenger brands and the more established brands walked away with some insights and new ideas. If you have questions for John, please join him in coffee break room number 2. He'll be there for 15 minutes for a Q&A over video or through chat. And we will be back together shortly to talk about the future of Amazon.